Princess Zaratil of the Vicarian Empire had witnessed the destruction of countless worlds. She had watched entire star systems burn under the might of her father's armadas. She had seen proud civilizations bow before the overwhelming power of Vicarian technology. Nothing in the vast cosmos had ever made her hands shake the way they did now, standing in the sterile white chamber of the human diplomatic vessel. The creature before her looked so ordinary, so fragile. Its pale skin stretched over what appeared to be a delicate frame. No natural armor plating like the Kronar. No energy manipulation abilities like the Thessians. No telepathic prowess like her own people. Just soft flesh, simple clothing, and those strange, calculating eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed mask of royal indifference. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat across from her at the negotiation table, her posture relaxed but alert. The human's dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that Zaratil's cultural databases labeled as practical. Everything about this being screamed weakness to trained Vicarian senses. Yet the princess found herself fighting an inexplicable urge to step backward. "Your Highness," the human spoke, her voice carrying none of the trembling fear that usually accompanied first meetings with Vicarian royalty. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I know your time is valuable." Zaratil's 4 eyes narrowed slightly, her crystalline skin shifting from its neutral blue to a barely perceptible shade of irritated purple. The human was being polite, certainly, but there was something underneath that courtesy, something that felt almost like amusement. "Human," she replied, letting her natural harmonic voice carry the weight of imperial authority. "I granted this audience out of curiosity, nothing more. Your species has managed to survive our initial contact longer than most. This is unusual." The Vicarian princess stood nearly 8 feet tall, her lithe form draped in ceremonial robes that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Crown-like neural extensions sprouted from her elongated skull, pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns that indicated her elevated status. Everything about her had been designed by millennia of evolution and genetic enhancement to project power, beauty, and absolute dominance. Sarah Chun smiled. It was not the desperate, pleading expression Zaratil expected, not the odd worship she had grown accustomed to from lesser species. It was genuine, warm, and somehow made the princess feel as though she were the one being evaluated rather than doing the evaluating. "Survival is something humans have always been good at," Sarah said, leaning back in her chair with casual confidence. "We've had lots of practice." The words sent an unexpected chill through Zaratil's enhanced nervous system. She had studied the human homeworld, of course, a death trap of a planet where everything seemed designed to kill its inhabitants. Extreme weather, natural disasters, predatory wildlife, diseases, and resources scattered across hostile terrain. By all logic, intelligence should never have evolved there, let alone thrived. Yet here they were, not just surviving, but expanding, exploring, and now sitting across from her as if they belonged among the stars. "Your world is primitive," Zaratil stated, though even as she said it, something felt wrong about the assessment. "Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your lifespans are brief. Your physical capabilities are limited. Logic dictates that you should have remained confined to your planet's surface." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right about most of that. We are primitive compared to you. Our technology is definitely behind yours. We do live short lives." She paused, and that smile returned. "But I think you might be missing something important in your assessment." The princess felt her control wavering slightly. This was not how these conversations typically went. Species either cowered before Vicarian might or attempted futile displays of their own power. They did not sit calmly and agree with critiques of their limitations while somehow making those very limitations sound like advantages. "Enlighten me," Zaratil said, her voice carrying more edge than she intended. "We're adaptable." Sarah's response was simple, but something about the way she said it made the princess's sophisticated threat assessment systems begin quietly cataloging potential dangers. Your empire has conquered dozens of worlds, hundreds of species. I've read the reports. Each conquest followed a similar pattern. You arrive, demonstrate overwhelming technological superiority, and offer the choice between submission and extinction. Zaratiel nodded slowly. It was an efficient system, one that had served the Empire well for over 1,000 years. Most species choose submission, Sarah continued. The smart ones, anyway. The proud ones fight, lose quickly, and join the Empire as conquered peoples. Either way, you add their resources to your own and move on to the next target. An accurate summary, the princess admitted. And this concerns you why exactly? Are you planning to choose extinction? Sarah laughed, and the sound was unlike anything Zaratiel had ever heard. Not the bitter laugh of the desperate or the mad cackle of those who had lost hope. This was genuine amusement, as if the human found something truly funny in their situation. Oh, we're definitely not choosing extinction, Sarah said. But we're not choosing submission either. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Zaratiel's threat assessment systems, finely tuned by evolution and enhancement, began sending subtle warning signals through her nervous system. Nothing about the human had changed physically. She still sat in the same relaxed posture, still wore the same friendly expression. Yet something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. There is no third option, Zaratiel said carefully. The Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We offer mercy to those who surrender and quick death to those who resist. These are the only choices available to you. Sarah Chen's smile widened slightly, and for the first time in the conversation, Princess Zaratiel truly understood why her hands were shaking. It was not fear of the human herself. It was the dawning realization that everything she thought she knew about humanity might be catastrophically wrong. Your Highness, Sarah said, her voice still pleasant and conversational, I think you're about to learn something very important about humans. We've been making our own options since before we discovered fire, and we've gotten very, very good at it. The princess found herself taking that step backward after all, her carefully maintained composure cracking for just a moment as she stared at this seemingly fragile creature who spoke of defying the most powerful empire in known space as if it were merely another obstacle to overcome. Outside the viewport, Zaratiel could see the edges of the human solar system, where her father's advanced fleet waited for her signal to begin the conquest. Suddenly, she was not entirely certain what that signal should be. Princess Zaratiel tried to regain her composure, drawing upon centuries of diplomatic training and royal bearing. Her crystalline skin had shifted to an almost imperceptible shade of concerned yellow, a color change that her biometric suppressors should have prevented entirely. The fact that this human could affect her so deeply was disturbing on multiple levels. You speak boldly for a representative of such a young species, she said, forcing her harmonic voice back to its neutral, authoritative tone. Perhaps you do not fully understand the scope of what you face. The Vicarian Empire spans 47 star systems. Our fleets number in the hundreds of thousands. Our weapons can crack planets. Sarah Chun reached into a simple briefcase beside her chair and withdrew what appeared to be a primitive data pad. She placed it on the table between them with the casual gesture of someone sharing family photos rather than military intelligence. We know, Sarah said simply. We've been watching. The words hit Zaratiel like a physical blow. The Empire's expansion into this sector had been carefully planned, their approach routes selected for maximum stealth. Their long-range reconnaissance had shown no signs of advanced detection capabilities from the human homeworld. Yet the way this ambassador spoke suggested otherwise. Watching, Zaratiel repeated, her voice betraying more curiosity than she intended. Sarah activated the device, and a three-dimensional hologram materialized above its surface. The princess recognized it immediately as a tactical display showing fleet positions, but the detail and accuracy made her breath catch in her throat. Every ship in the Advance Armada was accounted for, labeled with precise specifications, crew complements, and weapons capabilities. Your father's advanced fleet, Sarah explained conversationally. 12 dreadnoughts, 47 destroyers, and approximately 200 support vessels. Very impressive. The flagship is the Eternal Dominion, if I'm reading our intelligence correctly. 8 kilometers long, crew of roughly 50,000, equipped with planet-killing orbital bombardment systems. Zaratiel stared at the display in growing shock. Some of this information was classified at levels that should have been accessible only to the highest ranks of Imperial Command. How could you possibly? Oh, that's just from passive observation, Sarah continued, adjusting the hologram to show detailed schematics of individual vessels. Your ships aren't exactly subtle. They generate quite a bit of electromagnetic radiation, and some of your hull materials have very distinctive spectroscopic signatures. We've been tracking your movements since you entered the outer edge of our solar system 6 months ago. 6 months. The princess felt a chill run through her enhanced nervous system. The Empire's intelligence estimates had suggested that human detection capabilities were limited to their immediate planetary vicinity. If they had been observing Imperial fleet movements for half a year, "You seem troubled, Your Highness," Sarah observed with that same maddeningly calm demeanor. "I hope this information isn't too surprising. I mean, you did come here expecting to conquer a primitive world. Surely you ran some basic reconnaissance." The question stung because it highlighted a fundamental assumption that Zaratiel was beginning to realize might be fatally flawed. Imperial doctrine held that species technologically inferior by several centuries could not pose meaningful threats to their forces. Standard procedure called for minimal intelligence gathering beyond basic military assessment. Our reconnaissance indicated limited technological capabilities, Zaratiel admitted carefully. Radio, communications, primitive rockets, basic nuclear technology. Nothing that would suggest the ability to conduct the kind of surveillance you're describing. Sarah's smile returned, and this time it carried a hint of something that might have been pity. Radio communications that we've been intentionally broadcasting for over a century, knowing that anyone with decent sensors would pick them up. Primitive rockets that we use for basic orbital maintenance, while keeping our real propulsion systems carefully hidden. Nuclear technology that we developed specifically because we knew other species would see it as a benchmark of our capabilities. The implications crashed over the princess like a tidal wave. Everything the Empire knew about humanity had been carefully curated information. They had been watching, learning, and preparing for first contact while projecting the image of a naive, vulnerable civilization. That's impossible, Zaratiel protested weakly. Your energy signatures, your industrial output, your population centers. Our long-range sensors detect no signs of advanced technology. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. Your Highness, with respect, your sensors detect exactly what we want them to detect. We've had decades to study the technological signatures of the species your empire has conquered. We know what you look for, what you consider threatening, and what you dismiss as harmless. She gestured toward the viewport where the outer planets of the solar system were visible as distant points of light. What do your sensors tell you about Jupiter? Zaratiel's enhanced memory instantly recalled the survey data. A gas giant. Thick atmosphere, no solid surface. Unsuitable for habitation or industrial development. Your species has sent a few primitive probes there, but nothing significant. And Saturn? Similar. Rings of ice and rock. Also unsuitable for your purposes. Sarah nodded approvingly, as if the princess were a student who had correctly recited a lesson. Now let me tell you what's actually there. She manipulated the holographic display, and the image shifted to show the outer solar system in stunning detail. But instead of empty space punctuated by lifeless worlds, the display revealed a complex network of installations, shipyards, and defensive platforms cunningly disguised as natural phenomena. The rings of Saturn aren't just ice and rock, Sarah explained. They're the largest construction project in human history. Shipyards, manufacturing facilities, resource processing centers, and weapons platforms all designed to look like natural ring particles from a distance. Jupiter's atmosphere hides floating cities and military installations that could support millions of people. Zaratiel stared at the display in growing horror. The scope of what she was seeing defied everything she thought she knew about human capabilities. The energy requirements alone, our sensors would have detected industrial activity on this scale. Not if that activity was carefully shielded and the waste heat was channeled into Jupiter's existing radiation patterns, Sarah replied. We've been very careful about our energy signatures. Every installation is designed to mimic natural phenomena as closely as possible. The princess realized she was trembling again, but this time it was not from inexplicable nervousness. It was from the dawning understanding that her father's unstoppable armada was sailing directly into what appeared to be the most sophisticated military trap in galactic history. How long? She asked quietly. How long have you been preparing for this? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Active preparation? About 60 years, since we first detected signs of your empire's expansion pattern. But the underlying philosophy goes back much further. Humans have always understood that the universe is a dangerous place. We learned early that survival often depends on making sure threats underestimate you until it's too late for them to adjust their tactics. She paused, studying the princess's expression with those calculating eyes. The same way Earth appears to be a death trap that should have prevented intelligence from evolving, but actually produced one of the most adaptable species in known space. Zaratiel felt her carefully constructed worldview beginning to crumble. Every assumption about human weakness, every calculation about their inevitable submission, every plan for their easy conquest was being systematically dismantled by this seemingly fragile creature sitting across from her. What do you want? She asked, her harmonic voice barely above a whisper. Sarah Chen's smile became genuinely warm for the first time in their conversation. To prevent a war that would cost billions of lives on both sides. To find a solution that doesn't involve the destruction of either of our civilizations. The princess stared at her in stunned silence. You would spare the Empire? Even after what we intended to do to your world. Your Highness, Sarah said gently, we've been studying your empire for decades. We know about the conquered worlds, the enslaved populations, the systematic destruction of cultures that refuse to submit. We also know that most of your people genuinely believe they're bringing order and civilization to a chaotic galaxy. She gestured toward the tactical display, still showing the Imperial fleet. Those ships contain millions of individuals who think they're serving a noble cause. They have families, dreams, hopes for the future. We'd rather not kill them if we can avoid it. Zaratiel felt something she had never experienced before in her centuries of existence. Shame. This species that her empire had come to conquer was offering mercy to their would-be conquerors. Princess Zaratiel stood abruptly, her 8-foot frame towering over the seated human. Her neural crown extensions pulsed with agitated patterns of red and gold as she began pacing the length of the negotiation chamber. Everything she had been taught, every certainty she had held about the natural order of the galaxy, was dissolving around her. This is madness, she said, her harmonic voice echoing with distress. You speak as if you could actually resist the might of the Empire. Do you understand what you're suggesting? Even if your hidden installations are real, even if you've been deceiving our sensors, you're still one world against 47 star systems. Sarah Chun remained seated, watching the princess with patient understanding. Actually, we're 3 worlds, Your Highness. Mars has been fully terraformed and colonized for over 30 years, though we've been very careful to make it look like we've barely established a few research stations. Venus houses our primary research and development facilities under those lovely sulfuric acid clouds. Your sensors read it as completely uninhabitable, which is exactly what we wanted. The princess stopped pacing and whirled to face the human. 3 worlds against 47, plus all the conquered species under Imperial control. The mathematics are still impossible. Are they? Sarah asked quietly. She manipulated the holographic display again, and new information began cascading across its surface. Tell me, Your Highness, how many of those conquered species actually support the Empire willingly? The question caught Zaratil off guard. It was not something she had ever been encouraged to consider. Imperial doctrine held that conquered peoples were grateful for the peace and order that Vicarian rule provided. The alternative, in her understanding, was chaos and barbarism. The Empire provides stability, she said, though even as she spoke the words, they sounded hollow. Protection from the dangers of unguided development. Purpose and direction for species that might otherwise destroy themselves. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. And if they disagree with that assessment, if they preferred their previous way of life, despite its dangers and uncertainties, then they were wrong. Zaratil replied automatically, but the conviction that had once backed those words was crumbling. The Empire knows what is best for her. She trailed off, staring at the human who sat quietly, allowing the princess to hear her own words echoing in the sterile chamber. For the first time in her long life, Zaratil was beginning to understand how those words might sound to someone who had never known imperial rule. "Let me show you something," Sarah said gently, adjusting the holographic display once more. The image shifted to show communication logs, data streams, and what appear to be secret correspondence spanning decades. These are messages we've been receiving from resistance movements across the Empire, worlds that never stopped fighting for their freedom. Peoples who have been waiting for anyone, to provide them with hope. Zaratil studied the data with growing dismay. The scope of hidden resistance activity was staggering. Species she had been taught were grateful subjects were revealed to be maintaining underground networks, preserving forbidden cultures, and desperately seeking aid from anyone who might help them regain their independence. This is treasonous material," she whispered. From the Empire's perspective, yes, Sarah agreed. From the perspective of beings who want to determine their own destiny, it's something else entirely. The princess sank back into her chair, her crystalline skin cycling through rapid color changes as her emotional suppressors failed entirely. "You've been in contact with them. The resistance movements. You've been coordinating." "For over 40 years, Sarah confirmed. Sharing technology, providing intelligence, helping them understand that they're not alone in their desire for freedom. We've been very careful, of course. The Empire's counterintelligence capabilities are formidable." Zaratil looked up at the human, and, for the first time, she saw past the seemingly fragile exterior to something that terrified her on a fundamental level. This was not a representative of a primitive species begging for mercy. This was a coordinator of galactic insurrection, someone who had been patiently building a network of opposition that spanned the entire Empire. "The mathematics," she said slowly, "are not 47 systems against 3 worlds. They're much more complicated than that." "Much more complicated," Sarah agreed. "When you include resistance movements on captured worlds, species that have been secretly maintaining their military capabilities, and worlds that have been pretending loyalty while preparing for rebellion, the numbers become very different indeed." The princess realized she was hyperventilating, her respiratory system struggling to process the implications. "My father, the Emperor, they don't know. They think they're conducting a routine conquest operation against a primitive world." "We certainly hope they think that," Sarah said with a slight smile. "The effectiveness of our strategy depends entirely on the Empire continuing to underestimate both humanity and the scope of opposition within their own territory." Zaratil stared at her in dawning horror. "You want them to attack. You want my father to commit his forces to what he thinks will be an easy victory." "We want to end this cycle," Sarah corrected firmly. "For centuries, the Empire has expanded through a combination of overwhelming force and the assumption that resistance is futile. Species surrender because they believe they have no choice, no hope, no allies. That assumption is about to be proven catastrophically wrong." The human leaned forward, her expression becoming intense. Your father's advanced fleet represents a significant portion of the Empire's mobile military assets. If those ships are destroyed or captured here, while simultaneous uprisings occur across Imperial space, the entire power structure becomes vulnerable. Capture, Zaratiel repeated weakly. You plan to capture Imperial vessels? We plan to offer their crews the same choice we're offering you, Sarah explained. Surrender, join the resistance, and help us build something better than an empire based on conquest and oppression. Or continue fighting for a system that treats entire civilizations as resources to be exploited. The princess felt the last of her certainties crumbling. And if they refuse? Sarah's expression hardened. Then, they'll discover that humans have learned a great deal about warfare from studying the Empire's own tactics. We've had decades to prepare, Your Highness. Every weapon system, every defensive measure, every strategic doctrine the Imperial military uses, we've found ways to counter. She gestured toward the viewport where the distant Imperial fleet waited. Those ships are powerful, certainly, but they're designed to fight primitive civilizations with inferior technology. They're not designed to face an enemy that has spent half a century specifically preparing to kill them. Zaratiel closed her eyes, trying to process the scale of what she was learning. When she opened them again, she found Sarah Chun watching her with something that might have been compassion. "Why are you telling me all of this?" the princess asked. "Why reveal your plans to a member of the Imperial royal family?" "Because you have a choice to make," Sarah replied simply. "You can return to your father's fleet and warn them about what they're facing. They probably won't believe you initially, but eventually they might realize the truth and withdraw." The human paused, studying the princess's expression carefully. "Or you can help us find a better way. A way that doesn't require the destruction of millions of lives on both sides." "What kind of better way?" Zaratiel asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Help us contact your father directly," Sarah said. "Help us show him what we've shown you. Give him the opportunity to understand that the Empire can evolve beyond conquest and oppression. That there's a future where Vicarians and humans and all the other species in this galaxy can coexist as equals rather than conquerors and conquered." The princess stared at this seemingly impossible human who spoke of overthrowing galactic empires with the same casual confidence most people use to discuss the weather. "And if my father refuses?" Sarah Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried a weight that made Zaratiel's enhanced nervous system send urgent danger signals throughout her body. "Then he's going to learn the most important lesson in human history," the ambassador said quietly. "We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, natural disasters, and our own worst impulses. We've been the prey and the predator, the conquered and the conqueror. But most importantly, we've learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a superior enemy." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving the princess's face. "It's an inferior one that refuses to stay inferior." Princess Zaratiel spent the next hour in what humans would have recognized as deep contemplation, though her species experienced such states differently. Her neural crown extensions dimmed to barely perceptible glows as she processed information and emotions that threatened to overwhelm even her enhanced consciousness. Sarah Chan waited patiently, occasionally sipping from a cup of what appeared to be simple water, but which the princess suspected was probably far more sophisticated than it appeared. Everything about these humans seemed to follow that pattern. Simple exteriors hiding depths of complexity that defied initial assessment. "My father will not listen," Zaratiel finally said, her harmonic voice barely above a whisper. "Emperor Vextar has ruled for over 8 centuries. He has conquered more worlds than any leader in Imperial history. The concept of negotiating with what he considers an inferior species is literally incomprehensible to him." Sarah nodded slowly. "We suspected as much from our psychological profiles. Strong dominance-based hierarchy, reinforced by centuries of successful conquest. Change would represent not just political failure, but a fundamental challenge to his identity." The casual way the human discussed psychological warfare against her own father sent another chill through the princess's system. You've been studying him. Personally, we've been studying all the key Imperial leadership, Sarah confirmed. Your father, the major fleet commanders, the governors of significant worlds, the heads of important families. Understanding how your enemies think is basic strategy, Your Highness. Zaratiel looked up sharply. Enemies. You see us as enemies, then? Not potential allies. I see the Imperial system as an enemy, Sarah corrected carefully. The individuals within that system are more complicated. Some are true believers who genuinely think conquest brings peace. Others are simply trying to survive within a structure they don't dare challenge. And some are actively working to change things from within. The humans' eyes met the princess's with uncomfortable directness. The question is which category you fall into. Before Zaratiel could respond, a soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Sarah glanced at a device on her wrist and nodded to someone the princess couldn't see. Your Highness, she said formally, your father is requesting immediate contact. It seems our meeting has lasted longer than he expected. The princess felt her system flood with stress hormones. Emperor Vextar was not known for his patience, and he had given her specific instructions about the duration and purpose of this diplomatic contact. She was supposed to have delivered the Empire's ultimatum and returned with humanity's surrender within the hour. He'll want to know why the negotiations are taking so long, Zaratiel said, rising from her chair with visible reluctance. I should return to the fleet. You could, Sarah agreed, standing as well. Or you could invite him here. The suggestion was so unexpected that the princess actually staggered backward. Invite the Emperor to a human vessel? That's impossible. The security protocols alone are designed to prevent assassination attempts by primitive civilizations using crude weapons, Sarah finished calmly. But we're not interested in killing your father, Your Highness. We're interested in showing him the same things we've shown you. Zaratiel stared at her in disbelief. You want to conduct the same psychological manipulation on the Emperor that you've been conducting on me. I want to give him the same opportunity to understand the truth that I've given you, Sarah corrected. Whether he chooses to accept that truth or not is entirely up to him. The princess began pacing again, her neural extensions cycling through rapid patterns of indecision and fear. He would never agree to board a human ship. Even if he did, he would bring a full escort of Imperial guards. Your vessel would be swarming with armed Vicarians within minutes. Actually, Sarah said with that maddeningly calm demeanor, I was thinking we might meet on more neutral ground. She manipulated the holographic display one more time, and the image shifted to show a space station unlike anything Zaratiel had ever seen. It was clearly artificial, but seemed to have grown rather than been built, its organic curves and flowing architecture suggesting some kind of hybrid between engineering and biology. What is that? The princess breathed. The first joint construction project between humanity and our allies, Sarah explained. A diplomatic station built using combined technologies from 17 different species, all former subjects of various galactic empires. It exists in neutral space, exactly halfway between your father's fleet and our defensive perimeter. The implications were staggering. 17 species working together on a joint project implied coordination and cooperation on a scale that challenged everything Zaratiel understood about galactic politics. Most conquered civilizations barely maintained contact with each other, let alone collaborated on major construction efforts. How? She asked weakly. Very carefully, over many years, with a great deal of trust building and cultural exchange, Sarah replied. It turns out that species forced to surrender their independence often have similar perspectives on freedom and self-determination. She gestured toward the organic architecture of the station. The Zenthari contributed their bioengineering expertise. The Chromos provided gravitational manipulation technology. The Thessians handled the quantum communication systems. Each species brought their greatest strengths to create something none of us could have built alone. Zaratil studied the image more carefully and realized she was looking at something that shouldn't have been possible. The technological integration required for such a project would demand levels of cooperation and trust that even the Empire, with its rigid hierarchical structure, struggled to achieve. Your father could meet with representatives from all 17 species, Sarah continued. He could see firsthand what these supposedly inferior civilizations have accomplished when allowed to work together as equals rather than subjects and masters. The princess laughed bitterly. He would see it as a threat to be eliminated, not a miracle to be celebrated. Everything you're describing would only confirm his belief that conquered species must be kept separated and controlled. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But there's another possibility. He might recognize that the Empire's greatest strength, its diversity of conquered peoples, could become even greater if those peoples were willing partners rather than reluctant subjects. She paused, studying the princess's expression. More importantly, he might realize that the galaxy is changing whether the Empire adapts or not. The choice isn't between maintaining the old system and accepting chaos. The choice is between evolving voluntarily or being forced to evolve by circumstances beyond Imperial control. Zaratil felt a communication request pulsing through her neural implants, the urgent pattern indicating her father's growing impatience. She had minutes, perhaps seconds, before he would begin demanding explanations that she was not prepared to give. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "if I somehow convince my father to meet with you on that station, what exactly are you planning to show him?" Sarah's expression became serious. The truth about what's happening across the galaxy, the scope of the resistance movements, the technological capabilities of the species he considers conquered. The choice between a future of endless warfare against increasingly capable enemies or a future of cooperation and mutual benefit. And if he chooses warfare, then we'll show him something else, Sarah replied quietly. The combined military capabilities of 17 species that have spent decades preparing for exactly that choice. The strategic reality of facing an enemy that includes not just humanity, but every world that has ever dreamed of freedom. The communication request became more insistent, and Zaratil realized she was out of time. She had to make a decision that would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the future of galactic civilization. "He'll want guarantees," she said finally. "Safe passage, security protocols, proof that this isn't an elaborate trap. He can bring whatever escort he feels is necessary," Sarah assured her. "The station's defensive systems are designed to protect, not attack, and will provide complete technical specifications for every system on board, so he can verify for himself that no weapons are aimed at him." The princess closed her eyes, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, she found Sarah Chun watching her with an expression of gentle encouragement. "Your Highness," the human said softly, "this might be the most important decision anyone has made in centuries. Not just for our species, but for every species in the galaxy that dreams of something better than conquest and submission." Zaratil looked one more time at the image of the impossible station built by impossible cooperation between supposedly inferior species. Then, she activated her neural implants and sent a response to her father's increasingly urgent communications. "Imperial Father," she said formally, her harmonic voice carrying across the void between ships. "I have encountered something that requires your direct attention. I request permission to escort you to a meeting that may determine the future of the Empire itself." She looked at Sarah Chun, who nodded encouragingly. "There is much you need to see." Emperor Vextar of the Vicarian Empire stood 9 feet tall, even without his ceremonial armor, his ancient frame enhanced by centuries of genetic modification and technological integration. His neural crown was far more elaborate than his daughter's, a complex web of crystalline structures that pulsed with the accumulated wisdom and authority of 800 years of rule. As he materialized in the transport beam aboard the strange organic station, his first instinct was to catalog every potential threat, every possible escape route, every weakness in his surroundings. What he found instead was something that challenged his understanding of reality itself. The chamber they had entered was beautiful in a way that Imperial architecture, for all its grandeur and intimidation, had never achieved. Living walls seemed to breathe with gentle bioluminescence. Gravity flowed in subtle currents that made movement feel effortless. The air itself carried harmonics that seemed designed to promote calm contemplation rather than the constant alertness that Imperial spaces demanded. "Father," Princess Zuratil said formally, though her harmonic voice carried undertones of nervousness that centuries of diplomatic training couldn't entirely suppress. "May I present Ambassador Sarah Chun of the human species and the representatives of the Galactic Cooperation Council." Vextar's enhanced vision immediately identified 17 different life forms arranged around the chamber, each representing species that his empire had conquered decades or centuries ago. Some he recognized immediately as supposedly loyal Imperial subjects. Others appeared to be species that had supposedly been wiped out during the conquest process. "This is impossible," he said, his voice carrying the harmonic authority that had cowed entire star systems. The Zenthri were extinct. The Chromos' homeworld was sterilized. The Thessians exist only as scattered refugees in the outer territories. A creature that resembled a giant crystalline spider stepped forward, its form shifting through colors that the Emperor's database identified as Zenthri communication patterns. When it spoke, its voice was translated by systems far more sophisticated than anything in the Imperial archives. "Emperor Vextar," the being said formally, "I am Weaver of Hope Fromash, current speaker for the Zenthri people. We have been watching your empire's activities with great interest." The Emperor's threat assessment systems were screaming warnings, but not about immediate physical danger. Something far more disturbing was occurring. These beings, these supposedly conquered or destroyed species, were speaking to him as equals. There was no deference, no fear, no acknowledgement of his supreme authority. "The Zenthri homeworld was destroyed," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I personally oversaw the sterilization protocols." "You destroyed one world," the Zenthri agreed calmly. "We are a spacefaring people, Emperor. One world, even our birth world, does not contain our entire civilization. We evacuated the populations you thought you were killing. We've been rebuilding in systems you've never bothered to explore." Sarah Chun stepped forward, her small human frame somehow not diminished by the presence of beings far larger and more exotic than herself. "Your Majesty, what you're seeing here is the reality that your empire's intelligence services have been carefully kept from discovering. The galaxy is far more populated, far more connected, and far more unified in its opposition to conquest-based expansion than you've been led to believe." Vextar turned his attention to this impossibly small creature that dared to address him directly. Everything about humans suggested weakness, vulnerability, primitiveness. Yet something about this particular human made his ancient instincts whisper warnings. "You dare to lecture me? Primitive?" he said, allowing his full Imperial presence to focus on her like a weapon. "Your species has existed for mere moments compared to the age of my empire. You know nothing of the complexities of galactic governance." Sarah smiled, and the expression was so utterly fearless that the Emperor actually took a step backward. "Your Majesty, with respect, I think you're the one who doesn't understand the complexities of what's been happening while your attention was focused on conquest." She gestured, and the chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays showing star charts, communication networks, trade routes, and military positions spanning the entire galaxy. But instead of the neat, orderly Imperial territories that Vextar expected to see, the display showed something far more chaotic and dangerous. "This is the real galaxy," Sarah explained calmly. "Every red that represents an active resistance cell on an Imperial world. Every blue line represents a hidden communication network connecting supposedly conquered species. Every green marker represents a hidden base, shipyard, or defensive installation built by refugees from Imperial conquest. Vextar stared at the display in growing horror. The scope of what he was seeing defied everything he thought he knew about his own empire. If even half of this intelligence was accurate, then Imperial space was not the secure, controlled territory he believed it to be. It was a network of barely contained rebellions connected by invisible threads of resistance and cooperation. "This is fabricated," he said, though even as he spoke, part of his enhanced mind was analyzing the data patterns and finding them disturbingly consistent with genuine intelligence reports. Propaganda designed to create the illusion of organized opposition. "Is it?" asked a being that resembled a living crystalline formation. "I am Crystal Song of Ancient Memory, representing the Chromos remnant. Your empire believes our people were reduced to scattered nomads after our homeworld was conquered. In reality, we've been using our gravitational manipulation technology to create hidden colonies in asteroid fields, planetary rings, and the cores of dead worlds." Another being stepped forward, this one appearing to be made of living metal with surfaces that reflected impossible geometries. "I speak for the Theshan Collective. Your intelligence services believe we're refugees barely surviving in the outer territories. In truth, we've been using our temporal manipulation abilities to build industrial complexes in accelerated time bubbles. Centuries of development compressed into decades of real time. Each revelation hit the Emperor like a physical blow. These species, these supposedly broken remnants of conquered civilizations, were describing technological and organizational capabilities that rivaled or exceeded Imperial achievements. "Even if this is real," he said desperately, "even if you've managed to hide from Imperial oversight, you're still scattered groups facing the unified might of a galactic empire. The mathematics are impossible." "Are they?" Sarah asked quietly. She manipulated the display, and the view shifted to show real-time positions of military assets across the galaxy. "This is your empire's current military deployment. Notice anything interesting?" Vextar studied the patterns with the analytical mind that had built the greatest conquering force in galactic history. What he saw made his enhanced nervous system flood with alarm hormones. Imperial fleets were scattered across dozens of star systems, each group just barely large enough to maintain control over their assigned territories. The mobile reserves that could respond to major threats were surprisingly limited. "Your empire is overextended," explained the Zenthari speaker. 8 centuries of constant expansion have spread your forces too thin to respond to coordinated resistance. You can suppress uprisings on individual worlds, but not simultaneous rebellions across multiple systems. And that's assuming your forces remain loyal, added the Chromos representative. "How many of your crews are actually members of conquered species serving out of fear rather than conviction? How many would switch sides if they believed victory was possible?" Sarah stepped closer to the Emperor, her human fragility somehow transformed into something that felt dangerous rather than vulnerable. "Your Majesty, the age of conquest is ending. Not because superior civilizations are preventing it, but because the supposedly inferior civilizations have learned to work together in ways that make traditional empire building impossible." She gestured toward the assembled representatives. "These beings don't represent scattered refugees and broken remnants. They represent a new model of galactic civilization based on cooperation, mutual aid, and voluntary association rather than domination and control." Vextar looked around the chamber at beings he had believed were extinct, scattered, or firmly under Imperial control. Each of them met his gaze with calm confidence, showing no trace of the fear and submission he had come to expect from conquered species. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We want you to choose," Sarah replied simply. "The same choice we offered your daughter. The same choice we're offering to resistance movements across the galaxy. The same choice we'll eventually offer to every Imperial world and every conquered people. Which is evolution," said the Theshan representative. "Transform the Empire from a conquest-based hierarchy into a voluntary confederation of equals. Use your organizational abilities and technological resources to build something greater than the sum of its parts, rather than using them to suppress and exploit. And if we refuse? Sarah Chin's expression became infinitely sad. Then, you'll discover that humans aren't the only species that gets more dangerous when cornered. You'll face the combined resistance of every civilization that dreams of freedom, supported by technologies and strategies that have been developed specifically to counter imperial advantages. She paused, meeting the Emperor's ancient eyes with steady determination. The galaxy is changing, Your Majesty. The only question is whether the Vicarian Empire changes with it or gets swept away by forces it can no longer control. Vextar stood in silence for long moments, processing implications that challenged everything he had built his identity around. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of absolute power confronting the possibility of absolute change. You're asking me to abandon everything that has made the Empire great, everything that has brought order to chaos, unity to division, progress to stagnation. No, Sarah said gently. We're asking you to use those same abilities to build something even greater, something based on willing cooperation rather than forced submission, something that doesn't require the constant suppression of other civilizations' dreams and aspirations. The Emperor looked one more time around the chamber at the impossible gathering of supposedly conquered species working together as equals. In their calm confidence, their evident technological achievements, their unified purpose, he saw something that terrified him more than any weapon ever could. He saw the future, arriving whether he was ready for it or not. The choice, as you say, is mine, he said finally. But understand this, human. If I choose evolution, if I agree to transform the Empire, there will be those who resist. Military commanders who prefer conquest to cooperation. Governors who profit from the current system. Entire factions who see any change as weakness. Sarah nodded solemnly. We know. Change is never easy, especially for civilizations as old and established as yours. But the alternative is a war that will devastate the galaxy and leave everyone weaker. And you believe cooperation will make us all stronger? I believe, Sarah said with quiet conviction, that the combined wisdom, creativity, and resources of free civilizations working together can accomplish things that no empire based on conquest and control could ever achieve. Emperor Vextar closed his ancient eyes and felt the weight of galactic history shifting around him. When he opened them again, he was looking at the beginning of something entirely new. Very well, he said, his harmonic voice carrying across the chamber with the authority of 8 centuries of rule. Let us see what evolution looks like. In the years that followed, historians would mark this moment as the end of the age of empires and the beginning of the age of cooperation. But Sarah Chun, standing in that impossible chamber, surrounded by the representatives of 17 species that had refused to stay conquered, knew that the real victory was not in the Emperor's words. It was in the recognition that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was not superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but simply the refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they had always been. Humanity had survived by adapting, by evolving, by finding new solutions to impossible problems. Now, for the first time in galactic history, they would help an entire civilization learn to do the same.